Randy is one of those people who I know is on a very short list for me when I've got a question about how best to work in a city, how to think about it theologically. Randy is one of my go-to people. So with that, Randy, thank you again for saying yes this morning, and give us a bit of a reflection on what you all are doing in Fresno.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. And thank you, Lisa, for that presentation. Of course, it was Andy Crouch's article that a couple of weeks ago began us examining once again our identity as a leadership foundation. And as you know, one of the things we all do is enhance the capacity of other organizations to pursue change. It's one of the three foundational commitments of a leadership foundation. Here in Fresno, we have a fairly sophisticated ecosystem of leadership that for 30 years has really worked hard at being collaborative. But as you know, in times of crisis, people can go to their own silos and their own bunkers. And that's why Blizzard is such a good metaphor. We read the article, and then I began to talk with many community benefit organization or CBO execs around the city and realized it was all dawning on us that this was far more serious than anybody anticipated and had immediate implications for service delivery and all sorts of things. And of course, that's your first response in crisis. How can we continue doing what we were doing, right? Speaks to the psychological, emotional part of what it means to lead. How can we continue doing what we were doing? But within a couple of weeks, I began to hear sort of the voice of panic rising in many of these execs when they were realizing we may not be able to do what we were doing, and we don't know when we're going to go back to it. So I thought the first thing as a leadership foundation we could do is actually gather them and give them a chance to say, okay, here's the situation in our community benefit organization or nonprofit. And so we gathered, starting with Christ-centered community benefit organizations in our city. We first designed a survey that was intended to get at kind of where they are right now, what are their most urgent issues right now, and what are the anticipated issues moving ahead. The survey had 10 questions with sub-questions and was vetted through our Center for Online Learning at Fresno Pacific University. 100 community benefit organizations were invited. We had a significant response rate, 33%. The normal response rate to this kind of survey is 10 to 12%, so we were delighted with them. Again, we asked about the impact of the crisis on their organizations now and then what they anticipate for the future. And so I want to share with you some of the results. This is what I think an average city that has a collection, and especially of Christ-centered organizations, will be feeling. I don't think Fresno's that different, that special. I think most cities have networks like this, whether they're tied together or not. There are networks out there. And this is how they responded to our survey. 70% said that their organization is either being substantially or in nearly every way disrupted in its ability to carry out their primary mission during shelter in place. And another 18% said that they were moderately so. 63% said that the shelter in place portion of the crisis had disrupted their normal methodologies. Another 27 said moderately. And examples were dramatic. They included all sorts of things like the disruption of their normal methodologies, halting all neighborhood engagement activities coming to a standstill. They were unable to meet clients. That had no access to volunteers. Revenue streams had been utterly cut from dedicated enterprises. They were unable to perform grants and duties, and therefore they couldn't bill for their services. In terms of structural changes that they had to make, 91% said that they had to change the way they were delivering services. 76% said they had to forego or put on hold some of their initiatives. And 1 out of every 3 of these agencies said they had to lay off or furlough staff or downsize. 1 out of every 3 of the Christ-centered civic engagement entities in our city. The range of needs that they listed they're dealing with right now included, as you can imagine, funding and funding and funding. They talked about the need for new funding mechanism. They needed a more coherent CARES Act response. They needed tech training and internet service needs. Some, of course, were still locked in the 1990s and their communication methods. There was staff trauma and burnout that they listed. But they also listed basic things like we just need cleaning supplies and food products. We need technology needs. We have immediate budget needs to fund relief efforts, but also staff salaries. So these were the range of needs that they shared in the survey. 1 out of 4 execs said that if the shelter-in-place restrictions go on into May, that their very existence as organizations are threatened. Let me just pause there to let that sink in. 1 out of every 4 believe that if this goes on through May, that their very existence as an organization is threatened. That's no small thing. And 2/3 of them said that the way they do things will have to change, and so will their funding models in the future. They are not expecting a return to normal. Almost 40% of them said that they had no idea at all how the crisis was going to affect their funding, indicating the uncertainty we're all living with. So after the survey was done, we'd had a chance to study it and understand the implications. Then we gathered them just yesterday, in fact. And the majority of those who took the survey came on the Zoom call. There was tremendous interest in a collaborative learning environment, trying to understand each other's stories and what could be gleaned from it. We invited Dr. Kevin Brown, who formerly was the Leadership Foundation Director in New Orleans, who lived through the Katrina crisis and coordinated many of the rebuilding efforts, gathered the nonprofits and did a lot of coordination there, just kind of paid the price, has the scars to prove it. He came and shared what it meant to lead in crisis and some of the lessons that he learned from it. And though the nature of the Katrina crisis and the rebuilding is different utterly from the current crisis that we're in right now, it was amazing to hear the transferability of the lessons. And sad to say, our recording did not work until about halfway through his talk, so we don't have it in case you're wondering. We have a little tiny portion of it, but it was very good. And those gathered on the call, I think we had 26 Christ-centered community benefit organizations on the call, and they took great encouragement from his words, leading in a crisis, and just the humility that goes from it. And as leaders, we're going to be on a journey ourselves, and there's an emotional part of that journey, there's an intellectual part of that journey, there's a collaborative part of that journey. And it was, I think, an important moment in our life as a pretty sophisticated ecosystem in our city that we've developed for a couple decades now. You know, in a moment of crisis, you didn't have experts out there. You had very committed, you know, experienced CBO execs being vulnerable with each other about what they're facing and sharing the uncertainty and then learning from each other as well. We may do another one. This next one would not be on such a broad topic of tell us what your crisis is right now, tell us what your current needs are, and tell us how you plan to move ahead in the future. Wouldn't be as broad as that. We might choose something very narrowly focused on one aspect, provide some content, and then help them share their stories with each other, which is, this is the relational dimension. I think that Lisa, you were talking about. CBO execs really need that, and your city needs that. So the role we've discerned for ourselves in this moment, I mean, we have all of our own programs, the Center for Community Transformation in Fresno. We have 8 initiatives in the community, financial literacy and social enterprise development, micro enterprise development, anti-human trafficking, research, the mayor's faith-based partnership cabinet. We have all of these some are which are active and able to move ahead virtually, but others that are dead in the water until we figure out what moves are possible. But in this moment, we have, you know, a lot of internal work to do. And that internal work has to do with how can we serve our city and the networks that we're connected to. So that's what we're focusing on right now. And in that moment, I'm reminded of Proverbs 11:11, which says, "A city becomes great when the righteous are a blessing to it." So there will be a time when we are once again focused externally and applying all the programs that survive. But right now, we're focused internally, asking who should we be in this moment and how can that be a blessing to our city? And I think right now that for us, that means we lean into other leaders and resource and help them. So walking through the CARES Act, all the other resources, a number of other webinars happening this week with some of our partners, with the SBA, et cetera, and we're helping to navigate that. So, but you know, with the rest of you, we're on our knees daily and asking as a staff team, God, what would you have us do?